close.
All right, well, so welcome everybody. This is our very first SaaS executive leadership group call. So we've been obviously working with the Australian SaaS community for quite a while, but what we have found is there's no real safe space for executive leaders around product, marketing, sales, customer success, CEOs and founders. So we're wanting to do this probably once a month. It is part of the Buyer-Led Growth Show, which some of you will have already seen. We've got some of those episodes out, and today we actually have our very first guest, Mei Koon, Chief Marketing Officer of Squiz, will be joining us. Today's topic is around product and go-to-market alignment and some of the insights that we've observed over quite a while, but now we have some data that we can share publicly that is helping SaaS vendors win more deals, win them faster, and expand net revenue. So we all know that software is not easy. SaaS makes it great for the customer, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily easy for you and I. So as I said, we have discovered there's a couple of repeatable blueprints. Now, this isn't going to apply to everybody, and it's not necessarily an easy one and done, but I would love to get feedback from the group as to, if you are doing this, what have your findings been, and where, if you see this is applicable, how you might be able to adopt that. And obviously, we'd love to check in again later. Okay, so we know that winning is incredibly hard. The odds are against you. There is this massive debate in the industry. Is it 3% or 5% of potential buyers that are in market at any one time? Either way, 95% of them are not currently looking. And what many research papers have found, around about 40% of deals, using that term incorrectly, end in no decision. And so roughly 60% choose to do something other than the status quo. Of those, 80% start with a shortlist, and typically that is the category leaders. And the way that we are finding that buyers today are selecting vendors to shortlist is there'll be the one or two leaders that are top of mind in that category, and then they'll typically ask their peers or people they've worked with or in communities. So in the marketing space, they might be in the revenue collective, they might be in Exit 5, in mining, they'll talk to an industry group and so on. And so they start with this shortlist, and what's really difficult is that of those that buy, 90% of them will buy from that original shortlist. So this makes it very hard for companies and products that are not category leaders, that are up and coming or that are challenging the status quo. And that has some other flow-on effects, right? So one of the reasons that buyers will buy from their shortlist, it's kind of like no one ever got fired for buying IBM, right? It's about risk, or more specifically about perceived risk. So we all think, our stuff is awesome. And most of the time, it is. It's pretty good. So we think that 100% value, that's what we see. But from the buyer's perspective, they see this massive risk. And this is why so many deals end up in no decision. They kick the can down the road for the next guy. Because I might make a great decision and select something and it works. But we also know, especially in IT, that most projects go over budget and are over their implementation time, and they very rarely deliver everything all of the value that they thought they were going to get in the first place. So this is a massive risk, right, for their professional reputation, maybe even for their job. And so, the buyer sits there and goes, well, is it worth taking the risk and doing something different? And that's with a category leader. If I'm taking an even bigger risk for someone that is less well known, that takes a lot of work on our behalf to convince them that this is a good thing to do, right? And so this is one of the biggest problems that we face as marketers, as product people, as sellers, is managing this perceived risk. And some of the reasons why this risk is so big, and CB Insights did a study on this a while ago. They've since been bought and sold by Gartner. But a lot of the time, the buyers, especially lately, while the buying committee is expanding significantly, they're now going through this entire process of the buying selection, and they talk to vendors at the point where now I want pricing. The vendor doesn't want to do that. Obviously, they want to peel that back and talk more around, oh, let's re-architect your solution and problem. The buyer doesn't want to do that. But what's happening is the buyer, in more cases than not now, is misdiagnosing their problem and thus misselecting the product. And what we've also observed is no matter how great your product is, and Mei and I spoke about this quite a bit last week, is, and I've had this discussion with executives when I've worked for vendors, that your product is not going to be there in isolation, right? There is just naturally going to be other stuff, and so you're not the only part that is solving the buyer or your customer's actual big business problem. You're just a small player on that, and so what we had for a long time, like if we go back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, of everything was vertically integrated. I bought my hardware, software services from one vendor. Then it opened up, and we had all these standards. But for a long time, it was very much I'm going to buy solutions, and it's very rare that I would build. Right, that was at the high end of the market, or at the really low end where they just had no money, and so they had some smart people. With the advent of the cloud, and then we've had cloud native containers, we've had agile, we've had DevOps. That radically changed in about 2015, where we had this massive cycle of building rather than buying. Now, that was great for point solutions. It was great for dev shops. But for more holistic vendors, that posed a big problem. What we're now seeing in the last 18 months, and I don't know if this is related to COVID or if it's just happenstance, but that cycle is now swinging back, and it's probably going to end a bit more level than it was before. It won't be in one extreme to the other, but definitely there is now more appetite. I want to buy component solutions rather than building everything. But what we've observed, and like I've come from tech, and so I've lived this, like I've been my customer, is interoperability is a real problem, and integration between different applications and data flows and security and making sure it works in my environment and my people have the skills to be able to use it is a real challenge. And so what makes this even harder from the vendor perspective is when we're selling especially complex enterprise SaaS products, typically we end up having to play the analyst game. Now, in many cases, in the mid-market, analysts are becoming less important in the buyer's mind. But in the big enterprise space, they still go to Gartner Symposium, and they read the Magic Quadrant, they look at Forrester Wave, they review the GigaOM radar. And all of these reports prefer and bias towards platforms over point solutions or niche products, rightly or wrongly, right? And there's pros and cons. But the reality is that if you want to score highly on, say, the Magic Quadrant or the Forrester Wave or the GigaOM radar, you need to be a platform. Now, that has created another problem in that we have this feature bloat, and it's both in product and in our go-to-market. And I'll go through a couple of examples after these slides where we detail how one vendor in particular saw that and changed things and have gotten great results. But this is a real challenge, right? So what does this mean, right? So from the buyer's perspective, they've got lots of problems. They need to minimize risk for both personal and professional, but also for their company. And they've got all of these different things that need to work together. From the SaaS vendor's perspective, we talk a lot and you hear a lot of discussion about the need for marketing and sales to really be aligned. Like that's definitely something that we'll explore in another call. But there's nowhere near as much discussion around the need for product and go-to-market to have really tight alignment. And this is where often, working for both, startups and enterprise companies, product managers, they're building their thing and it's great. And then we have, the product marketing team, the marketing team, and then sales are going and doing a lot of that same work again around user interviews, value proposition, building out the jobs to be done for all of the messaging and the positioning. And there's a lot of repetition, but not collaboration and reuse. But then we see that product is building something that doesn't necessarily align with how the market actually wants to consume it. The features and the functions and the capabilities are there, but there's this disconnect around the packaging and the pricing. And for those companies that really want to scale and scale quickly and achieve growth while minimizing wasted spend, they really need to be in lockstep. And everyone talks now about the age of ZIRP, zero interest rate policy is over. Money is significantly more expensive than it used to be, although historically still relatively cheap. But budgets have been cut. We see in the G2 reports for B2B SaaS that SaaS contracts are getting shorter. Often they are 6 months to a year in the mid-market and low enterprise. And they are reviewing them on an annual basis as when it comes up for renewal. Like, do I need this software? And so from a SaaS vendor perspective, we need to land reasonably sized deals and then actually expand. Like, I have lost count as to how many vendors I've spoken to where, we've got a land and expand strategy, but there's no expand. And there's a number of reasons for that. And then, the final thing is like showing how well you play with others, especially in this environment where you are going to play part of their data pipeline or their workflow process, right? There'll be data that comes into you, there'll be users that interact, and there'll be data that flows out somewhere else. So look, this kind of sounds simple when I put it in 6 bullet points, but it's not, right? Like, this stuff is hard. So what we have observed, and this is kind of the sneak peek, the meat and potatoes, is yes, platforms are good, but the vendors that we are seeing that are growing and growing quickly and sustainably are building modular platforms. And so that's not so when we talk about modularity, it's not in terms of just having a packaging and pricing structure that kind of takes advantage and bleeds your customer, but is actually focused and delivers holistic solutions, but allows your larger suite of products to be able to work together, but I can buy them and swap them in and out individually. So it allows your buying teams to solve one problem at a time. It reduces the risk because the size of the change is much smaller and the impact is potentially much less. But if you then also make sure that you build with interoperability as a first class, upfront thing, it's not an add-on, it's not something I do later. Like, definitely in the low end of B2B, we see a lot of vendors really lead with, we've got 100, we've got 1,000 different integrations, and we're starting to see that at the mid-market and enterprise SaaS space as well. But then we also couple that with a deliberate onboarding success path. Now, I find it interesting from a marketers, like a lot of CMOs, and Mei here, I love it, is an exception to this. They look at, I want to acquire a customer, and then my job's done. Or I talk to sales managers, even in SaaS or PaaS, and they're like, once the customers sign the contract, like, my job's done. That's now customer success's problem. And so I think this is one of the reasons we've seen, this move to a CRO, like Chief Revenue Officer responsibility, or even the founder. But okay, yes, it's hard and it's great that we acquired customers, but we need to get them to use the software, right? Like, the buyer's remorse is strongest right after I've, swiped the credit card and pressed hard, 3 copies, right? So we need to be able to make sure that we continue all that great work and get the customer to get value right early and upfront. So consistently, those companies that are doing this well have a really strong product marketing function. Now, I kind of touched on this earlier with the sales and marketing. There's often misalignment. And one of the biggest examples of this is, marketing will hit their lead goals and it's like, yay, great, 1,000 MQLs this month. And sales are sitting there going, these leads are terrible, and they miss their revenue goal because there's no qualified opportunities. So there's at least discussions about that. But we see that there's typically strong relationships, of varying degrees between, say, product and marketing, or marketing and sales, a little bit between product management and sales and customer success. But customer success is often kind of seen as this like thing off on the side. And not to say that we're only talking about the onboarding part, right? But most organizations are organized in terms of functions, right? Rather than stages of the process. And, there's a saying of like, don't ship your org chart. We do that so many times, right? So what we really need is to have a strong alignment between the metrics that, say, product management or marketing, any of these, the output metric that they're responsible for is directly related to the input metric of the team that they're serving, right? And so where we've seen this working really well is strategy and product marketing are kind of like one and the same. They're joined at the hip. It's informed by the business and the leadership. But rather than having this loosely coupled connection where, things move from one team to another, they all move together, right? And so as strategy moves, so does product management, marketing, customer success, and sales. Similarly, as sales closes deals, they get learnings, that feeds straight back into the other teams. There's really strong sharing of data. There's a lot of alignment around the metrics and the OKRs that they have. And so, what we see in companies that adopt this approach is a faster time to market and a higher land and more likely expand scenario. And so to give you some examples, all right, so ShipIt, they're a multi-carrier shipping software for e-commerce. And again, next week, we'll be releasing a conversation I had with Jay Daly, head of product marketing at ShipIt, who really drove a lot of this. They have they've got a platform, but a number of very different solutions. And so, for example, for them, like very different buyers, that the stuff that happens at time of sale, marketing and IT care about. But the stuff that is about shipping, that's in the warehouse and logistics. Like they are completely different parts of the business. And so completely different requirements, different people. But what they had originally is this one kind of like monolithic sizing packaging strategy where it didn't matter what you were buying or who you were that was doing the purchasing, you just got everything. And they had this kind of like tiered approach. And what they also found is that, they would win customers, but they never really grew them, right? And so originally their North Star metric was around packages shipped, right? And volume through their network and software. And what they've learned is that wasn't working. So, Jay really drove this approach to modularize the product and their go-to-market strategy. And so the outcome, their packaging is now aligned with their segmentation approach. So you can actually see this reflected on their website. But the results are pretty incredible. So he's been able to achieve consistently an uplift in ACV of new deals between 70 and 120% after 12 months. They've moved up market at the same time. They're getting bigger deals, but selling faster, and they've improved their CAC to LTV ratio. So all of that by going back and looking at how can we just look at who our buyer is and align their needs to the way that product is supplying that, so that our product and our go-to-market is like hand in glove, right? And now they're working on all the next pieces of how can we tighten and close that loop even further as they continue to develop more products. So I'll open this up to Mei. So at Squiz, 25-year SaaS product. They've grown with their own development and acquisition. And Mei joined around 2020. And like we explore this in more detail in episode 1. But they were sold as a single platform, but they were developed and marketed and sold separately. So, Mei, if you'd like to just dive in and share a couple of thoughts here, and then we can open for Q&A.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, Andrew and Michelle. And I can't see anybody else here, but I'm glad to meet you all and hope you reach out on LinkedIn. I would love to connect. So Squiz, as Andrew mentioned, is a digital experience platform. Many people may not have heard of that. It's still a relatively new category. But if you have worked with a content management system, a CMS, a web CMS, to create, manage, and optimize your websites, that is essentially the start point and kernel of what a DXP is. The DXP just allows you to expand that into personalization and customer data platforms and optimization tools and analytics and site search. We just try to help make it easier for you to manage the more complex digital environment and ecosystem and multi-channel environment that you're working with right now. So our story really, and I joined slightly earlier, so it was 2022, and it was pretty much just after COVID at the time. We were just coming out of it, and Squiz was a very interesting company for me to join because it's not a newbie. It's been around for a very long time, and it's one of those success stories in Australia. But it was going through a bit of a who are we today, right? Which typically you go through at least 2 or 3 times over that period of 25 years. Now, they started off as a web CMS, helping people to build and manage websites. Then they acquired a enterprise search capability. That's that search bar that searches for content that's held within your site and your digital assets. And then it discovered that customers wanted integrations. You know, to Andrew's earlier point, you need to integrate with a lot more systems and data sources to be able to deliver experiences. And then they expanded into a data storage capability as well. So when I joined, they were marketing themselves as a digital experience platform, but essentially were selling 4 different standalone products. And this was confusing. And particularly because we had been quiet, let's just say over COVID, we didn't see any customers. Everybody was kind of trying to figure out what to do next. So we were in standalone thing, keeping quiet. And then we needed to say, okay, we need to re-engage with our customers. But I quickly discovered when I got there asking questions, who are we and what do we do, that our own internal staff were very confused. They were selling 4 standalone products, but we said we were a DXP. The sales teams and the account teams essentially were not confident. And if they're not confident, they can't do their job and the market gets confused. And then you start having people ask questions, you know, maybe they don't know where they're going. So all these kinds of affects your brand and your reputation. And it was infecting staff culture as well, that lack of confidence. So I think what we really decided to do here was to look at how do we actually start to reframe who we were and do that accurately. We, to Andrew's point, we did kind of talk about in the last episode that he did on Violet Podcast. We did customer research. We spoke to a lot of different customers to find out what their perspective was, because we were lucky we had a lot of customers to talk to. And that really helped us clarify that we were overcomplicating the story. And they actually helped us really outline who we were very crisply. They said, this is what you do well. This is why we stay with you. This is the stuff that you need to fix. This is what we want next. And it didn't take a lot of time. It took 2 months, 50 interviews, one-to-one qualitative interviews, and you could pretty much kind of land with a value proposition very quickly straight after that. And I think one of the key things that came up that links very much to what Andrew was talking about, the product and go-to-market connection was very important here. We had developed a product roadmap prior to me arriving that was, you know, very clear that we wanted to be a very modular, composable DXP, which is definitely still our vision. But the prioritization of the elements within that roadmap and what we were focusing on we had to review. The document was pretty much fresh off the press by the time the research came out. And the executive and the CEO, led by the CEO, said, there are no sacred cows here. Is what the customer saying about who we are and what they want and what our gaps are, does that tie into the roadmap? And we had some aha moments where it didn't in some cases. And it actually caused the entire organization to pivot in terms of our roadmap, our investments, and what our milestones were moving forward to align with that kind of clear proposition and what the customers were needing from us. I'll stop there because there's a lot. Andrew, was that what you wanted to cover, or was there anything else?
No, that was really good. I always love hearing your story. It's really cool. I know we've got a couple of people on the line. What I'd love to do is open it up for questions. I do still see. I saw Andrew and Natasha were here earlier. I'll let Michelle do the Q&A bit and drive the buttons. I can't see everything.
That's so good. I love that story of how everything pivoted, and I'll happily throw in a couple of questions there. So, I mean, firstly, it's great to have another example of it not having to take that much time to land on a direction to pursue. I think a lot of the clients that we work with and a lot of companies we go into, they're very scared that it's a massive process and that it's going to take a long time. And because of that perception that it's going to take so long, they kind of avoid it and going that deep. So that's a great example of that. I had two major questions that came from listening to that story. When those interviews were conducted to dig into exactly what it is about Squiz that they valued versus what they didn't value and how it was helping them, was there any one or several sets of questions that really helped to get to that value proposition?
Yeah, I think this comes up, I think, in some general survey frameworks. We did say, if we took something away, what would really hurt?
Yep.
Deprivation studies. Yep.
So that, because I think you get a kind of a false economies when you do interviews, when you ask them, what are the great stuff, what's the gaps, and none of it's prioritized. So I think we very much focused on what are your top two. If we took this away, what would hurt? If we did this, how would it impact you? So really trying to get them to quantify the priority of that gap or that missing piece that they were giving feedback on. And if it was positive feedback, we did the same thing. If we didn't do this, how would it actually impact you?
Mm-hmm.
And that revealed a lot. Like sometimes they say, well, it just makes me feel good, then it's like, okay, that's great to know, but it's probably not going to move the dial from a go-to-market or a product side of things.
No, and that's such a perfect example of countering bias. We find that with a lot of companies that we work with, even the ones who are, by the book, doing well, speaking to customers, it's always clouded by bias. And so it's always great to pull up these examples of how you're countering that obvious bias where the answers come back colored versus how do we actually, see both sides of the coin and dig a little bit deeper. So that's an awesome example. The second question I had was, it's one thing to get those insights, but it's another thing. Everyone's very attached to their companies and their products. It's usually like my baby. And having that detachment from the product is a difficult thing to have, to know when to listen to buyers and to pivot. Was there anything, internally from a leadership perspective that happened, or that you can recall, that what was the shift in mindset for them to embrace the feedback and embrace that pivot?
I would say I was very surprised by this. The CEO himself is very much like, we need to be okay to blow things up. So he led from the top, just the fact that we need to be doing things that actually help us grow. If we're 50% down the route and they're not the right things, you need to act now. So I think he led the charge around that. The executive team as well, I'd give them full credit around. I was the newbie, right? So I had nothing to lose. But for a lot of them, they'd been there through 10, 20 years of the organization. The co-founder was another amazing, like, if you talk about sacred cows and owning stuff, like he really opened the door. Like, I'm sure it wasn't easy, but he opened the door as well. So I think the independent element of the research was always a good start point because no one has an agenda. It's actual feedback. So that's always a good entry point. But I think it did take some hard, uncomfortable conversations. And no doubt that's always hard. You need to have the right people at around the table. And luckily we did, where they were able to go through their own personal struggles, manage their team's struggles with some of the decisions that had to be made. And we had to say, hey, next year's budget ask is going to come from this team. That means we're not going to get it next year. And we're going to have to make do with that. That's a tough thing, right? Because you then start to, when things get taken away from you, that's when you turn territorial and you get aggressive and you get, protective. And those are the things that can destroy a strategic shift as an organization. And I would say that it was tough, but it was led from the top by the CEO and the co-founder. The exec team handled it tremendously well. And then we had to flow that through the teams because that's always hard when you're further away from the nucleus.
Yeah. No, it's another great example of how the system can often dictate how things go, and having that collaboration and that combined goal of what everyone's trying to achieve, that it becomes less about, pointing fingers and getting a little bit cagey about your own space and collaborating to that goal that everyone is striving towards. So, yeah.
And I would say a key part of that, a lot of it's the system, but a lot of it's culture as well. One of the things that we had to really be mindful of is don't give room for whinging.
I like that.
And it starts with the leadership, right? Like, you want to be the empathetic leader. So when you're going through a change and your team is struggling through it, they will go, things used to be better then. We didn't have to do this then. And sometimes as a leader, you go, yeah, isn't it hard? Yeah. Like, the moment you do that, you're opening the door for them to just go, yeah, I can actually reject this change because you hear me and you understand my pain. That actually is one of those really small things that actually opens up a floodgate that will create this resistance from the ground up without you realizing it. So I think that's one of those subtle things that we've learned that really matters a lot.
Yeah, subtle but powerful. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
No, that's awesome. Any other questions? Maybe open it.
Hi, Natasha.
Hi.
Sorry, I have an unmute, but I don't have an camera. It's a bit weird.
That's all right.
You don't need to see me. I do have a question for Mei. How do you prevent any sway from that strategic shift that you take, for people falling into old ways? Because commonly we do, pieces of research, or we, put into place new initiatives that aren't always easy. And then over time, we see leaders, making those excuses, but falling into old ways. And then we have to work so much harder to get it back. What's your experience been in trying to prevent that sway?
That's a really good point. I think we've discovered that a lot along the way. And even today, embedding what we think is, we've got the proposition, we've got the go-to-market. It's super clear. We communicate it at town halls and execs, etc., meetings. But then it's still a once and done. And we realize very quickly that that does not work. So I think two things probably. One is repetition. And the other thing is visibility. So ideally, any strategic shift has some key metrics. So you're either giving people a sense, and it should be really simple, like one key North Star metric, right, that everybody can understand. That gets put up and that you talk about it every month. and you link it back to what that shift was been and how is it impacting. And if it's not working, you be honest about it too, right? Like they trust you if you're honest about it. So linking that back to the strategic shift. The other thing is apart from the town halls, we do a lot of smaller functional level, group level enablement sessions where we used to run them more as in, this is the first time we've launched something and we want to tell everybody. Now we have a standard cadence of monthly sessions where we repeat things from 3 months ago, because there's so much coming at our teams that they forget very easily, and you can't blame them. So we need to put into place systems and methods to keep reminding people of things that we talked about 3 months ago, as well as new things, so they keep coming back to it, particularly in the sales area, I suppose, for us, or any customer-facing area. Realistically, they have to work with the most amount of information, right? And naturally, they retain things that are useful right at that time. So you may talk about something 3 months ago that will be really relevant, but unless they heard it yesterday, they won't remember and they won't bring it up because they're just militantly focused on what I need to keep my brain right now. So yeah, visibility and frequency.
It's amazing the parallels between internal and the market about being top of mind.
Yeah, and because we're not a PLG company, we need to rely on our people, and that's the human thing, right?
Yep. Andrew, I meant to say, long time, but congratulations on your recent promotion, moving from compliance, I think it was, to all of product now at Tanda. Nice work. Well done. I know you guys use ShapeUp from your product development side, and so there's a couple of that has a quite big distinctive difference around things like roadmaps. So I'd be keen to kind of get some of your feedback about, like, you're new in this role, you've got a kind of different approach to how a lot of SaaS product management operates. How are you seeing this from your perspective at Tanda? Because you guys have got a couple of different solutions in that workforce management space now too, right?
Sure. So we extended into payroll and HR, but it's still within like the broad job of getting people to work and paying them. So it's not not big steps out of that.
Yep.
I think the biggest challenge for us has been simplifying our messages, and like you're talking about feature bloat. I mean, that's been a challenge for us, being a little too responsive, and I think ShapeUp was helpful in some respects for that.
So it brought more discipline. Is that what you're driving at?
Yeah, like just forced people to think a little more directly about what we were prioritizing and for whom. Probably the for whom was the biggest thing.
Yep.
I was probably over the course of the last few years, we've better honed the target market and aligned everyone at that. Whereas previously we sort of split up people to sell to different size businesses, and we had engineers focused on building for different size businesses, and made a pretty disjointed overall system. But I think we've sort of backed away from a lot of that, and we still have our challenges.
Yeah, definitely. It's SaaS and software. It's not easy. So the more we can learn from each other, the better. What I'd love coming off the back of this is any other topics that is kind of like top of mind for you guys. Obviously, like we're out there, we're working with a number of you, but part of it is just how can we make, like, one of the things, why Michelle and I started DeepStar is there's so many great ideas that just don't succeed because of missed parts of execution. And so if we can take some learnings like what we've done today, definitely this will be applicable for some people and not for others. But if we can share those things, that'd be great. So if there's particular challenges that you or peers are having, and you want to discuss them, then like this is the place, right? So safe space, but let's all grow. So thanks everybody. I will send out the recording, I think in 2 weeks. But yeah, this has been great. Thanks everyone for joining. Great conversation, and thanks again, Mei. Really appreciate you donating more of your time.
And I'd love to connect with Natasha and Andrew. Anybody else that watches this would love to keep that conversation going.
You've been listening to the Buy-Led Growth Show, where we help you scale without wasting spend.